Hello and welcome to the Dharma Gates podcast. Here I will be interviewing folks with deep expertise on topics relevant to the future of Buddhism, young people, and meditation, and opportunities to pursue formal training in Buddhist practice in various traditions. So one of the topics I've been interested in here is the notion of different expressions of practice in life. And that sometimes we have this dichotomy between a spiritual life and a more engaged life. And so I find it very interesting to hear the perspectives of people who've managed to balance these and thread these engaged and, practice-oriented perspectives together in a really beautiful way. So I'm really delighted to have Jessie Morey from IBME here today. Which will hopefully be one of these cases. IBME stands for Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, which works to offer mindfulness retreats to teenagers across the U.S. I've thought of them kind of since the beginning as one of the older sibling of Dharma Gates in a way, in terms of being larger than us, established before us, but doing very similar work in the world. And I've met a number of past Dharma Gates participants who began their journey with IBME and had really powerful experiences. And so it's wonderful to have this chance to talk to Jess about what that was like, getting that project off the ground. So today we'll talk a bit about balancing personal practice and service, the inspiration behind IBME, Jess's learnings and growth in serving as the co-founder and executive director, and where Jess is directing her energy now, having stepped back from that role. So I'll go into a quick formal introduction and then we'll move into questions. But thank you for joining me.
Mm-hmm. Great to be here.
And so, Jessie Morey began practicing meditation at 14 on teen retreats offered by the Insight Meditation Society, or IMS. She has made a consistent commitment to meditation since then. She is a lead teacher, co-founder, and former executive director of Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, which runs in-depth mindfulness programming for youth and the parents and professionals who support them across the U.S. and internationally. Before dedicating her professional life to teaching mindfulness, Jess studied engineering and worked in clean energy finance. She has no doubt in the technical brilliance of humanity and to solve the challenges facing us, including climate change and systemic injustice. Where she believes we need some help is in our inner and interpersonal intelligence. And her published works range from the chapter Ordinary Awakening in Blue Jean Buddha, Conflict Resolution of the Baruka Hydroenergy Project, Renewable Energy Production, Costa Rica. She combined these areas of passion in an article in the Shambhala Sun, Bodhi Trees, about the potential of Buddhist practice to heal our relationship with the natural world. She holds a BA in Environmental Engineering from Dartmouth College and master's degrees in Sustainable Development and International Affairs. That's the formal bit. But thank you for joining me. And maybe we can start with just a short discussion of how did you get into this whole world of mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism, and it sounds like you were very young, which is wonderful. But what was that point of contact for you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess I just want to, before I dive into that, I was just, as you were sharing about my bio, and I was feeling great gratitude for you and Dharma Gates, because there's a long time with Inward Bound that so many people are asking for programs for young adults. And it just was like such an extra effort, and we tried in various different ways and never kind of fully got that off the ground. So I'm so happy that you guys did and are doing that. Yeah, It's awesome. It's such a needed place of support. Yeah. Right. So I started meditating as a teenager, a little bit before that, because my mom did a fair amount of meditation. She would go to the Insight Meditation Society when I was a kid. I think probably like every summer. She was a school teacher. And then when I was 14, a few years before that, they started the teen meditation retreats at the Insight Meditation Society. So she encouraged myself and my siblings to go. Uh, and I totally fell in love with IMS, with the practice, with the form of the teen retreats, which were like a lot more social and relational. Um, yeah. And so stuck with it. And then I deferred a year of college when I was 18 and went to Burma and practiced in a monastery, Sayadaw U Pandita, for a number of months, and then also ordained for a short period there in Burma. Yeah. And then like since I have continued to practice. I took a year off. I took a semester off in college and did the 3 month at the Insight Meditation Society, did the 3 month retreat. Yeah, and then just like it's every year, it's just been a like sort of central aspect of my life, retreat and practice since then. Anything else about that would be
Yeah,
useful?
yeah. I didn't know that you went to Burma. That's amazing. That's wonderful. Um, I would be curious. This might be a little bit down the road, but maybe we can make sure to circle back to um, how did you balance the sort of interest in retreat and personal practice over time with the full career, you know. But um, maybe we can turn to for a minute. I'm very curious about, you know, do you identify as a Buddhist? How do you hold that label, given IMS is a secular organization, um, or maybe not?
IBME
IBME,
is secular. IMS, yeah,
yeah,
definitely not secular.
yeah,
Yep.
IBME is secular,
Mhm.
and there seems to be obviously a lot of uh, inspiration from the Buddhist tradition coming through the practices, but maybe in your own life, how does that play out?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think it wouldn't be like totally natural or to identify as a Buddhist. That would
Mm.
there's some a little bit of hesitation, but if you like, if there's some if I had to choose, like if I had to identify with a religion, I definitely it would be Buddhism. Um, yeah, I've now finished that. I, I was part of the IMS, the Insight Meditation Society's 4 year teacher training, which finished a few years ago. So I'm officially a Buddhist teacher in the Insight tradition, and I gather even like a kind of a pastor
Mm.
form from that. And so I teach at Spirit Rock in the Insight Meditation Society in like that very clear insight lineage. Um, yeah, but I was raised Catholic. My
Mm.
mom actually was a Catholic nun for 9 years before she left and had children and a family. So I have that historical, and it's like baptized, confirmed, even though it was like always in conversation with my relationship to that. Um, yeah. So I definitely mostly in my own like my practice, my references, like my orientation is towards like Buddhist frameworks of reality and the mind and the heart and Buddhist training. So in that way, probably
Mm.
Buddhist. But I
Mhm.
actually just had a really strong, wonderful conversation with my friend Dave Smith, who has I think his podcast is called The Secular Buddhist. And in that context, I think I probably identify as like a kind of secular Buddhist,
Mhm. Mhm.
except for I also am totally down with the like cosmology of Buddhism too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny conversation. It's not always, I think, in some ways, some religions, there's a very clear conversion process or something, and you are that thing. But I find it interesting hearing how people
Especially,
hold that
yeah.
that word.
I mean, especially in the insight tradition, there
Mhm.
isn't like
Yeah.
whereas like in the Tibetan lineages, it
Mhm.
does seem like there's more ritual and formality to like taking refuge and things like
Mhm.
that. Um,
Mhm.
but there's not so much in the insight tradition like that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about the process of founding IBME, and how did that, what was it like getting it off the ground, and how did you, hold your own practice in the relationship to the enormous amount of work that can be starting a nonprofit. And what was that like for you, learning to, I don't know, set
Mhm.
boundaries or create that space, or yeah,
Mhm.
well, how did that
Yeah.
unfold?
I mean, it was definitely really challenging. I mean, a
Mm.
few things. So before that, I worked in clean energy and climate. I lived in DC, and for a while, I worked at the World Bank, and then some other nonprofits working in climate policy and finance. And so, like, all of my vacations, I spent on retreat. That's just like what I did, was use my time off to go on retreat. And then when I transitioned my job, when I quit my job and then took over running IBME, I did a 6 week retreat at IMS. I did half the 3 month. So like I kind of was always orienting to how can I go do retreat, but definitely if I hadn't made that transition, and then when I was at IBME, it was so hard to do long retreat. That was for sure. And during that time, I spoke with Joseph Goldstein, who's founded IMS. And his like first and primary recommendation for me was to do a month of retreat every year, and to like plan that out far in advance and make sure that I did it. So I didn't fully take that advice, but I did do a couple weeks of retreat every year. And then like what was cool is when I set up IBME, I was like, okay, we got a fair amount of vacation, but then also like 1 week paid retreat time, which was separate. So I kind of built that into the structure of the employment at IBME. So that made it, and also we would give you a stipend to go on retreat. Um, yeah, and then I mean it was amazing because in the context of leading Inward Bound, I was like constantly in touch with these unbelievable teachers and so much wisdom. So I like our guiding teachers council, this incredible group of elders that I got to talk to. I got to teach with all of these different teachers because so many people would be excited to come teach like a week of teen retreat. So it was really, really good for my practice to be in that environment. That was just like what I was swimming in. Yeah. But not easy. Then I had this like very high expectation of the way that I work in my day to day needs to be like totally in alignment with my Dharma ethics and values and practice. And so that was not easy. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm curious. It's really funny listening to you talk because it sounds like someone else talking, like my life, which is uh is amusing, but also I'd be curious to zoom in more on that
Mhm.
part of the, that daily life, like workflow of of harmonizing the practice and the work. Because I think in retreat, if we're able to carve out that time, it's relatively easy to just sit. but
Mhm.
but that space for me, at least, of that, how do you actually work in a way that's not, you know, uh, out of alignment with the practice, is something that I'm like really working with. And so
Mhm.
I'd be
Mhm.
curious, what did you discover in that? And maybe it's always messy, but
Mhm.
I'm imagining that there was some process of learning how to do the work.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because, like, okay, especially in the insight tradition. I mean, I've also done a fair amount of Tibetan practice, um, but in the insight, when you go on silent retreat, like, you're not, there is some building of underlying skills that can translate to how we function in the world and relationship, but like, you are not learning concrete skills for how to be super mindful in relationship. That's my view, because you're silent. You're just totally silent, looking at your own mind. Like translating that to a daily life and a job and relationships is like there's a big gap, and I really found that in my life. Um, so what was interesting of being with IBME, and we made the explicit decision to be secular, to be more accessible in the context where we were teaching and leading retreats. it was awesome because I got all this influence from all these like secular mindfulness teachers and books and practices, which had so much emphasis on like take a minute of a deep breath, like a few times a day, or of like meditations on how to like do your email mindfully, or um, what happens when you're mad at a coworker. So actually, I started just like soaking in all of this secular mindfulness. That was actually what I needed to be more aligned with my values in work. Like my insight retreat practice was not that helpful, but these like simple little like pop mindfulness things were. I was like, yeah, actually that's helpful. That I should do that each day, take 5 minutes and like throughout the day. Um, so that was a big thing. And it was awesome to be in the secular world because I was getting all of that influence too of how to translate it. And then there are other things that feel vital, and they feel vital to me for everyone. Like I did a lot of practice and study of nonviolent communication
Mm.
and that whole paradigm in terms of how to work with people collaboratively and be more effective in communication. And then like tons of therapy. I need to do tons of therapy. Like I
Mm.
can't speak highly enough about therapy is actually what helped transform my uh, afflictive mental emotional patterns in work relationships. So
Mm.
yeah, just going on retreat didn't change that. So yeah, so those are the ways that I had to bring in these other things to actually be able to translate my values into work.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like I've seen like for me like body practice, qigong has been like a revelation in terms of just keeping some continuity outside of retreat, but many other modalities. I'd be curious about on the therapy thread. There's there's many types of therapy, and some of them I think uh, I know somatic therapy, for example, is very popular. It kind of integrates with the Dharma in a certain way. And what kind of therapy did you find helpful, or did you try a bunch of things, or I'd be curious.
Yeah, I feel really grateful for, I guess I could call it my like therapy karma. Um,
Mm.
so I did a lot of somatic experiencing, and that was because like one of my main mentors, a teacher named Temple Smith,
Mm.
he was really into it, and he recommended that any Dharma teachers train in somatic experiencing and then do it themselves. So I did level one training in that, and then I had a somatic experiencing therapist. So that was huge. Like just
Mm.
as that grounded, like you were saying about qigong, like coming into the body, huge, huge, huge part of integrating for me also. Um, so I did somatic experiencing, and then through another Dharma friend, uh, actually Dave Smith, who I just mentioned, he introduced me to a teacher or a therapist who's really specifically like an intensive trauma therapist.
Mm.
And one of her main modalities is internal family systems.
Yeah.
So she was a huge influence, and my work with her is transformative. And through that, I got into internal family systems, and so kind of using that framework. So that approach is huge. And now I've done the certified in the level one of internal family systems also, to bring that into my teaching and work. Um, and then the other like kind of you say monumental influence and mentor in my life is a teacher named Dan Brown,
Mm.
who is a Tibetan Bon lineage meditation master. He passed away a few years ago, but I met him through his retreats. I did his meditation retreats, and then on there, in those retreats, he talked about attachment theory and his approach to healing attachment theory. And I had learned about attachment theory earlier from another meditation friend and done some meditations towards healing attachment wounding. But Dan's practice is called the internal family system. No, the ideal parent protocol was totally revolutionary. And so then I started working. Dan is also, he was a therapist. He was a professor at Harvard, um, expert witness on trauma, like kind of one of the most interesting men in the world. And so I worked with him as a therapist for a number of years, and actually until he passed away. So those three, like somatic experiencing, internal family systems, and then Dan's ideal parent protocol, and the kind of most important therapeutic modalities for me.
Yeah. I'm curious. I imagine, as the ED of IBME during that time, that there was some, what we are engaging with and practicing with also informs the organization and how things are structured. And did this sort of psychological frameworks and therapeutic work affect the sort of how you were designing the organization and the retreats? Or I'm curious about at Dharma Gates we talk a little bit about what's the secret sauce of a Dharma Gates retreat? What is a Dharma Gates retreat? Why is it unique? And I'd be curious, what is IBME retreat in a in a few words of like what was what are the elements that you're thinking of in pulling something like that together to make it powerful?
Yeah, well, I'd say the kind of primary secret sauce of IBME retreats are the relationality of them. There's a strong emphasis on relationship and connection and the small group work that we do. But I inherited all of that from my mentors who were doing, experimenting with team retreat models before we made IBME, before we made Inward Bound. So it was already had that strong, clear relational perspective. Actually, Temple Smith was who had kind of taken them to California. And he was the one doing all that somatic experiencing and other relational stuff that he brought into the team retreats. So I feel like I inherited that lineage from them. And then I definitely love to give Dharma talks that integrate what I'm learning. Like I would give a lot of talks about internal family systems, and it's like relationship to Dharma and practice. And like now I teach all the time about attachment theory and healing attachment and Dharma, the Brahma Viharas. So like there's just like a orientation of my mind. So I certainly gave those instructions. But yeah, I would say the relationality was what is like the secret sauce of it. And then probably like the playful, fun creativity. But that's like because of the teens and that age in life and how playful, fun, and creative they are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe zooming out in terms of from IBME in particular to this attitude of doing service in the world, balancing one's personal interest in spiritual practice and the inclination to help to do something. I'd be curious, what would you say in retrospect after having done the whole founding an organization, growing it to be successful, going through the whole process, to someone who might be interested, like considering trying something like that? Maybe a young person who's considering, how do I decide where to put my energy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What comes to mind for me is like, this is where I really love the Tibetan framework of like the bodhisattva intention or ideal, like that Mahayana tradition so, within that framework, you do like the Hinayana, you do your own kind of practice to get some stability of mind and like kind of get your stuff together. And then you're also really cultivating your motivation and intention. So I think I'd say that like keep cleaning up, working on growing up, deepening your own self-understanding and like capacities, and then really strengthen your motivation and intention and keep purifying that motivation and intention. And by that I mean like, all this was mixed in, like all my own like psychological wounding and needs for like to help and to impact and all of that kind of like so the thing is, like, when you think about how IBM is structured, it's easier for me to think about like how my own challenges impacted the way it was structured, like overachieving and overworking and scarcity and work drive, like how that got built in to the
Mm.
organizational culture. So if you want to be in leadership, the more you heal that and work that out, the less you're going to have your own neuroses impacting your leadership and like whatever you create.
Mm.
So there's that aspect. And then the thing about the intention is like I just feel like if you trust your intention, you keep coming back to your intention, you trust it and stay open, that like the way opens. So like I thought I was going to save the world through like clean energy and climate, finance and policy. Like that was, since a very young age, like that was my direction. And running IBME, like it was like we'd hired this wonderful young man to be our executive director. And he, within like 2 months, fell ill with, actually, he was going into heart failure, like totally healthy, um, energetic young man. And they never really figured out what was happening, but he had to get a heart transplant. I think at the time he was like 28 or 29. So, so then we had this total crisis. Like now we had hired him to run it. I had my whole career, and my colleagues, my friends on the board were like, well, do you want to quit your job and run IBME? And I was like, no. I have health insurance, I have a career, well paid. And just it was a little bit like, my roommate also got cancer. I met my husband who was recovering from cancer. Uh, my brother passed away. So it was like the messengers in the Buddha story of like, oh, wait a minute, what's most important and what am I doing? So then I took over running IBME. But even at that point, I was like, well, I'm just going to do it for like maybe 2 years and get it all kind of set up. And then I'll like go back to my career. And then I was like almost 15 years later that I, finally made the full transition out of the executive director role. So by that, I'm just saying that's like clarifying our intention, staying really closely connected to our heart and our deepest motivations and joys, and then like stay open to what's actually happening. Like, where is the flow going? So there's like no way I ever would have been like, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to start a youth mindfulness organization. Like, never. And even to this day, I'm like, I love young people. I love teen retreats, but I wouldn't say like, oh, my passion is like teenagers, which is a funny thing to say. It's like someone who is dedicated now, like 20, and I just started the contemplative semester, which is a college program for semester. But that's not my conscious deepest passion. But I just keep saying yes to like the doors that are opening and where I can help. So there's something like that I would advise.
Yeah, I appreciate and resonate with that a lot of, this, in some ways it seems like, I had a call with one of our advisors, Shukin Roshi, a few weeks ago, and he was saying, it's just bodhicitta is like the anchor of it's the rudder of the ship. It keeps it, there's going to be storms, there's going to be things happening all the time, but if you keep coming back to the basic, may my practice benefit beings, that's the stability point. But also this notion of like, we kind of get invited into things, into opportunities to help. It's not like we choose necessarily, like, oh, I'm going to help in this way and this is how it's all going to work out. We don't really know.
Yeah. And then it's also like this prayer of like, may I be of service? May I just be of service? May I be of service? Like, I mean, I'm in a place now where I'm orienting more to like, well, what do I think is like, in terms of what's next, what is my deepest passion and where are we headed with that? But sometimes if we do that, like, here's my vision or my purpose, is like so much about self,
Mm.
right? Which is also antithetical to our Buddhist practice. So this kind of like just rudder and bodhicitta and then stay open without the like an egoic
Mm.
drive that feels so much more aligned with practice. Um, yeah, because then it can get so caught up in like, yeah, self and uh, control, which we quickly see leads to a lot of suffering.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 I'd be curious, since so much of your career has been working with young people. There's been, quite a few publications coming out about mental health crisis among young adults and teenagers, and I'd be curious, you know, how has that showed up in your world and in even in the arc of IBME? Like, did you notice a change? And is there any wisdom you have from that work of what's going on? What's the what's the remedy? Or because you know, I have we also are encountering this,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
my read is it's real. You know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, for a while, I wondered, like, are we just getting the kids that, like, because we are this mindfulness organization, like, we're getting kids that have a lot of emotional struggles. But then, as I actually lived at a boarding school for 12 years, my husband was the director of mindfulness at a high school, boarding school. So we lived there together. Um, and then through that and through my friendships and connections there, I got to see that, like, no, this is just like globally what's happening with young people is that it's getting more intense. It wasn't just the context of Inward Bound, which was disturbing and sad. The other thing that is so fascinating is like the correlation between smartphones and the rise in depression. Like some of that research and writing that's been done about that, and actually like I think it was 2007 that the first iPhone came out, which was like, I think the year that we started doing teen retreats in Virginia was the year the iPhone came out. And so there was also this like, we could just kind of track its popularity and the impact on young people. And like, we went through the process of like, there were iPods that I don't know if you remember, they weren't phones, but they were like
Mhm.
before, and how we were kind of like, yeah, you can keep that. But then like the phones came, we're like, oh, well, can they keep their phones? And then having to set up a policy of like, you can't have your phone, you have to hand your phone in. And the whole thing that happened with like kids sneaking phones and not phones. And we went through that whole journey. And so anyway, I think there's something really meaningful about phones and technology and social media for sure in terms of the depression and mental health issues. Um, so IBME, like one of the, I think nowadays, like one of the biggest things it is like a place without phones where young people have to like just talk to each other and have like actual face-to-face embodied interactions and like see how beneficial that is. So sometimes now I think we could do nothing and just have a space with no phones for a week, and that would have dramatic impact. Um, yeah. So the like those are some of my thoughts about that. Um, yeah, and which also I think brings me closer into some of those other skill sets around that are psychological and self development for young people of like agency and discipline and um, developing clear habits. Like that all feels super important. Uh, but then the other big, not but, there's also something just about the state of the world, you know? And sometimes when parents are like, oh, my kid's really anxious. And part of me is like, yeah, no kidding. Like if you're not a little depressed and anxious, you know, as you look at what's happening in the world, like then maybe that's a problem. Like, so, so then like honoring that it's like honoring the dukkha that they're seeing really clearly and not ignoring that. But then what are we going to do about it? And how do we stay connected to our own like self empowerment and joy with it while we're staying connected to like this is totally not okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting that everybody kind of mentions the tech piece in terms of, oh, there's something going on here, there's something going on here, but I think it's 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 like the water we're swimming in right now, so it's hard to tell completely how much of it is just the tech.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have this, yeah, um, also this sense that there's something really big there that we haven't really come to terms with yet in terms of what social media is doing to, especially, I think of the people even a few years below me,
Mm-hmm.
um, where I I came up, Instagram and Facebook were like just really taking over. And when I was a senior in high school, which would be like what was that? 2013, 2012. But there was something, the generation below me, they came up with TikTok and Reels, like even just a few years. And the amount of capture of the population was much higher. And I could tell the difference in that age of
Wow.
that 3-year gap from
Mm-hmm.
the seniors to the freshmen. They had a very different relationship to social media than than we did,
Mm-hmm.
which was, it feels like there's something that kind of came in like a tidal wave, like, and we got out. I sort of just missed it a little bit, but there's something,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, very, if it was up to me, I would probably be a authoritarian, ban it all,
Mm-hmm.
is my sense, because yeah, it's quite scary.
Yeah. I mean, like that, Marv, who's another mentor within Teen Retreats, he would always say, like, he'd be like, I don't know what to do, but to the young people, and be like, I don't know. Like, we actually edited our, um, one of our precepts, the fifth around
Mm.
intoxicants, to include technology. And then we're like, but Marv would always say, like, I don't know. He's like, I didn't grow up with technology, but you guys are the ones that are gonna have to show us, like, what do we do? What are we gonna do about this? Like,
Mm.
how do we be skillful with this? So yeah, that feels like an open question. But certainly for me personally, like, I've never been on TikTok. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't like go to Facebook or Instagram, or I can't even, like, my obsession is like reading the New York Times over and over again. And I have to like block that out. So
Yeah.
I'm certainly in that vein, but I can also see like some of the benefits. And I'm currently like kind of playing with AI in different ways
Mm.
in my
Mm.
work. So I'm like trying to start dabble with that. My initial response was like, get away. But there's something like, well, here we are, this is what's
Yeah.
happening. So how is this part of awakening? That's
Mm.
my question.
I've been a bit inspired by, there's this organization founded by young people. I haven't kept close tabs on them, but I ran into them a few years ago, called Log Off. And they're all young people, organized and directed, and all about, moderating our relationship to social media and tech. And I think in some ways that is, as you're saying, like where it's going to have to come from, is young people themselves being like, actually, like, we don't want this. Uh, we don't need this in the way it's being sold to us.
Mhm.
That's just
Mhm.
it's my suspicion, but
Yeah, I know. I have a 2-year-old now, an almost 3-year-old, and
mm,
that was always what terrified me. I used to say I was going to raise, if I ever had a child, I'd raise them in like a village in Africa or something, but now they're satellite Wi-Fi. So thanks a lot, Elon Musk, yet again. Um, anyway, that's like terrified me, but um, yeah, it's just something I think about a lot for him. But I actually feel a little bit grateful that like he's not the first generation where it was just like chaos, like no one had any idea what to do. That like we are pretty focused on like what are we going
mm,
to do about this, and there's like agreements now that parent groups will make in schools, like that no cell phones for kids until they're like 14. parent groups will like sign agreements together to do things like
Yeah.
that. And there's like kind of social movement. So I feel like, okay, we're kind of in the next wave and have some ideas about how to navigate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe we could turn a little bit to, you know, what's coming up for you. What's next? I think it was maybe a few years ago that you stepped back from the ED kind of position, and I know you've gone through the IBME teachers course, and or not IBME, that I keep getting them confused. The IMS teacher training, and you're looking at other things. So what are you excited about in your work now?
Um, yeah. Uh, so what I'm focused on now, so I just, yeah, I'm no longer running IBME, but, and I had a son, so it's also hard to go on retreats. I'm just kind of starting to teach retreats again, but mostly I'm teaching retreats to adults.
Mhm.
And what I'm really focused on is doing the attachment healing work that I learned from Dan Brown, from my teacher. So doing the ideal parent protocol, which is a really therapeutic. It's like a full combination of Dharma practice, contemplative practice, like meditative practice, um, with attachment theory. And the way that I kind of interpret what he's done there is it's almost like he took the wisdom of a number of Tibetan practices and translated them to a Western psyche and structure. Like now I kind of sometimes think about some of those Tibetan practices like nindros as like psychological practices that like prepare the heart and mind for the awakening practices, the more direct awakening practices. And so like the combination of those. So now I also think about doing this kind of work, like healing attachment wounding and trauma, as the preparatory work for awakening, and sort of foundational. So that's where I focus my time. I work one-on-one with people, and then this year I'll be teaching I'll teach a retreat in March, just myself. That's combining those really explicitly, Dharma practice and attachment healing for people. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you mentioned like the the kind of translating of the Nyundro or the Tibetan practices into the psychological framework. I've been doing Nyundro here, and I can go through the individual practices within the Nyundro are like, I could imagine Guru Rinpoche as like the all-loving parent, right? Or you're visualizing this deity, right, and being in relationship to the deity as a reflection of our own mind, but
Mm-hmm.
the deity being this kind of perfect expression of compassion. And
Yeah.
I had never made that connection before. It's very interesting.
And have you done Vajrasattva mantra?
I'm doing Vajrasattva. Yeah, it's my
Okay.
main
Yeah.
practice.
So the way that I was taught it and practiced with it, that like it's like that complete forgiveness and profound
Mm,
acceptance. That's like in a very embodied way of just like it's all okay, you're forgiven. That's the way I like interpreted the purification of the deep
yeah.
acceptance and allowance. Like
Hmm.
that's that like unconditional loving presence that we take refuge in, and that is just like loving us through the whole thing. It's okay, it's
Mm,
safe, you're safe, you're safe. um, and that's really what attachment is about. It's like establishing this unshakable foundation, like a secure base of safety. Like I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm going to be loved, I'm going to be accepted, I'm attuned to and protected. And from that foundation, then we go explore. That's like the
mm,
evolutionary. And you see that with children, the way that it works, the exploratory and the attachment. And so establishing that in your own awareness through the deity practices, and uh, to me then allows you to have the sense of safety enough to go explore, like to to awaken means like totally letting go and exploring beyond all these constructs, which is like terrifying. So having that safety is what even allows us to be willing to let go of all the concepts, to see how things actually are. Yeah.
It's so interesting because you mentioned that this psychological interventions were a part of what allowed you to integrate the sort of Dharma into a more busy life. And I think I've had the same experience from a very different angle of the Nyundro, the Tibetan practices have been really, really helpful for me in actually doing Dharma gates because I found, I've done a number of these kind of longer Burmese style shamatha retreats that are just concentration on the breath. And you get very, very deep, profound experiences with that. And then I would just get hit with a train, like hit with a train right after leaving the retreat of just all of the old things come back. And it's a very deep, fragile experience, which has been my experience of that style versus the Nyundro is like, maybe it deepens in a different way, but then you go around all day and you're there's this kind of resilience in I think maybe partially because it also works so much with the heart, that if the heart's in a good alignment, you can kind of meet your life in a basically, there's less residue. You're not gathering little resentments about everybody all day, and then you can actually sit at the end of the day. So it's an interesting parallel. I had never thought of Nyundro as like parts work basically, but I think it
Yeah.
might be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Yeah. When I know about like, or at least an aspect of the Tibetan tradition is like that, so much about the householder lineages,
Yeah.
The Mahasiddhas, or many of them, jobs and families, and uh, so
Well,
there's something to it.
yeah, I've been practicing. I started in Zen and then I was doing Theravada stuff, but I sort of actively sought out the Nyingma partially because I knew they had such a deep householder tradition, um, and a really sophisticated framework for conceiving of lay students practicing to like realization.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, I'm doing Dharma gates. Like that's what I need. Like I can't really do a monastic style approach to, which was the system I was practicing in before. It's the Pa'ak method.
Right.
And they're like, you got to have really stable conditions to make meaningful progress in that method.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that was another thing with Dan Brown, who's the Tibetan practitioner master. Like his retreats are not totally silent. In fact, like
Mhm.
we would go home because it was close to us, and people would go out for lunch and dinner, and I had some of the most profound, some of the deepest concentration states after 4 days of his not silent retreat, compared to like a month long in a completely silent trying to do Pauk Anapanasati. So at least for me, my mind, my structure, the like relational aspects of that allowed my mind to actually let go and get settled into a
Yeah.
very deep concentration state. Um, so yeah, that's my pretty strong orientation now. Even
Mm.
though I still go on like silent retreats because I'm interested. So maybe like after, like bringing that with me in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That's very, very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious. So, one question we like to ask anybody who we're interviewing is a lot of our audience for Dharma Gates, we're in the 18 to 35 demographic, a lot of people who have some interest in practice, um, and are often exploring that. Like, what does that mean? And, what advice would you have given yourself at that age? And not it could be about anything, but also around uh, maybe these themes of service and practice and um, making sense of, how do you move forward given what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy question, but
Mm-hmm. I think the advice that comes to mind for me is like if you want to practice, then practice a lot, like kind of like what you're doing now, of like living in different retreat centers and just practicing a lot. Like that is like a desire in your heart. I would just say go for it, just do it as much as you can. And then when you recognize that like psychological material might also have to be addressed, and so get some good therapy at the same time and deal with that. But um, if you have that desire and fire, like do it, really do it, especially at that age. Now it's so obvious now that I have a, a child. Like I just am not. I'm away right now on a training or for this attachment work for like 4 nights, and it feels like too much. I'm like, it's very hard to be away for 4 nights. So, and I did a 5-night retreat this year for the first time, and it was awesome. But that by itself is so challenging. So yeah, and like practice in your daily, like just practice a lot if you have that desire while you can, because if you want to become a householder that like has children and a career and buys a house, which now I'm about to do too for the first time. I'm about to become an actual householder. Uh, it does, like you get locked into certain structures that make it hard to practice in the same amount. So do it, go for it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Go for it.
You won't ever regret it, I don't think.
Well, is there anything else that would feel meaningful to share or talk about before we end? We're getting through the questions I had.
No, I think this other thing that's coming to mind right now for me too, though, is like I love having a child. It's awesome. I highly recommend having children for deepening understanding and practice too, when the time is right. Yeah, it's so great. And it's so fun. Like, so we had kids really late. And partially because I was like, I don't want to give up my retreat practice. Um, so it's really great. And it's so fun right now. Like there's a bunch of IBME staff who are like have had or are having kids in the last like 2 years. And so it's super fun to have like a cohort of like deep practicing friends who have young children. Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for taking a bit of time, and it's a really wonderful conversation, and hope that anybody who listens to it finds some benefit. If people are interested in, practicing with you or following what you do, what's the best way for them to stay in the loop?
Yeah, to go, I have a website, if you jessicamorey.org, Jessica Morey, and then so my events on there, my retreats, and then there's a newsletter that you can subscribe to that I very sporadically send out messages about what's happening. So that, yeah, go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter to hear more about what I'm doing. Yeah.
Great. Great. All right. Well, we can
Cool.
end it there.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.